Hello everyone, we're back again. We're done with our introduction and we're ready to head out into history. I just want to recall that last week we ended in this vision of Am Yisrael being carried into the Babylonian exile. What they were carrying with them was their ruach. If in the period of the Avot, of the forefathers, we had a development of the primary spiritual and moral foundations on which Am Yisrael would build its existence, then in this period of remez, of meaning in local context, which was the first temple period, we had a development of the ruach, of the spirit of Am Yisrael. And this ruach found its primary expression in all of the books of what we call the Tanakh. Now it's important to note, because our story is going to hinge today on the book of Daniel. It's important to note a few things about the book of Daniel. First of all, it's a book which is, in its content, avowedly prophetic. What do I mean? He's seeing visions. He's having dreams. They're interpretations about the future, about all of mankind. If it's not prophetic, then I'm not sure exactly what it is. But nevertheless, when we look at it in the Tanakh, it's located in the Ketuvim, in the writings. I want to take a quick minute to explain one perspective on the divisions of the Tanakh. Torah, we know, is the 5 books of Moses. This, the Gemara tells us, Da b'shchina migoren Moshe, that God's voice itself spoke through Moshe, meaning that there was no content of humanity. This was purely divine revelation. The books of the Nevi'im, we understand that God gave the vision, but the Navi's imagination and the power of his mind is what provided the words and the specific imagery. This is why, from perspective of authority, though the content is critical, we're not precise with the wording in our learning. We don't learn halacha from the diukim, the specific meanings in the words. Nevertheless, a divine revelation, a human vessel. The writings we typically relate to on a different perspective, that this is a hitorut shelatata. This is an upwelling from down below. The Psalms, the songs that David HaMelech sang through all the passionate moment of his life, were messages from below to above, but they were messages that in their essence, in their greatness, encapsulated something about the human experience which received divine favor. Right? It was an upwelling from above which received a blessing from God. So oddly enough, we'll see that the book of Daniel, despite the content in classic prophecy of predictions and visions of the future, will end up in the book of writings. And when we get much later in our course, maybe we'll address why that is. So another piece of context to understand before we tell the story. Up until this point in the history of Am Yisrael, history itself has been a collective unfolding of experience. This is the idea we touched on already, that the actions of flesh and blood will be an articulation of the will of the living God. Right? But the 2 primary general forms that this experience takes will be malchut, kingship, the structure within which people live, and nevuah, prophecy, the voice of God as it speaks out through them. And we want to keep our eyes very carefully on where malchut and nevuah go through the story of Daniel. So here we go. Right? Daniel, as a young boy, is taken away in the first exile. People may not be aware that before the temple was destroyed, 11 years before in fact, King Yoakim was taken away with all the nobles of Jerusalem by Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babel, all the nobles, the wise men, and many of the royal seed. And when they were taken away to Babel, the book of Daniel tells us that Nebuchadnezzar required from his servants to find him some young men who could be taught the language of Babel, Aramaic, who would be raised to their wisdom, and if they were comely and wise, would be able to stand before the king and give him advice. And Daniel, in addition to his 3 friends, who we won't discuss right now, Daniel was one such chosen. Now it happened one night that Nebuchadnezzar was troubled with a dream. And he woke in the morning and he called in the stargazers, the magicians, the conjurers, the Chassidim, everyone you would possibly call upon to let you interpret your dreams. And he said to them, I am troubled. I had a dream last night. Tell me what it means. And they said, O wise king, tell us the dream. And he said, no, you don't understand. I don't remember the dream. You have to tell me and then interpret it. And they said, O wise king, nothing doing. That's not the way it works. You tell us the dream. We'll tell you what it means. And he said, if that's the case, then what good are any of you? Kill them all. And that's indeed what begins to happen. Nebuchadnezzar sends out the slaughterers, who at this point have been well trained, and they begin to destroy the wise men of Babel. When they reach Daniel, he says, oh, you could kill me, but first tell me why. So when they explain to him the predicament, he says, give me 1 night. And he goes away and he prays. He prays to God, and God reveals to him the vision of Nebuchadnezzar. He's whisked into the presence of the king in the morning, and he proceeds to tell him his dream. And he says, O king, you were troubled upon your bed with visions of the night, and this is what you saw. It was a giant statue with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, legs of iron, and feet mixed from iron and clay, and then a stone was cut without hands that flew through the air and destroyed this idol and grew into a mighty mountain. You can imagine the reaction that Nebuchadnezzar would have as he heard his dream unfolding through the mouth of this young man. At the end of it, he in fact was ready to worship Daniel and offer him sacrifices, but Daniel said, no, it's not I that interpret dreams, but rather it is God. Now, what is this story going to tell us? This is short form, by the way. I advise you to read the second chapter of Daniel for a real explanation. What are we going to learn from this? What is this vision that Nebuchadnezzar has seen, and why does it matter for history? Well, this vision is essentially a vision of history, as Daniel himself tells him. He says, Anthu Malka Resha de Dahava. You, Nebuchadnezzar, are the head of gold. And he says that a kingdom will come after you, which will be of a lesser kingdom, and will be the arms and chest of silver. And a kingdom will come after that, which will rule over the whole world, and it will be the belly and thighs of brass. And then will come a kingdom with the might of iron, and it will crush all the other kingdoms, and so on. And he goes and explains at last that this stone that flies through the air and destroys them all, becoming a great mountain, will be the kingdom that God sets up that lasts forever. This is a vision of Malchut, of the structure which unites, of the world in which we live, and this Malchut has been taken away from Am Yisrael. They are no longer the flesh and blood articulation of the will of the living God, and handed over to the nations, and primarily to Nebuchadnezzar. He is the one. He is the head of gold. Right? And history will move from him downwards, from gold to silver, silver to brass, brass to iron. It may be strong, but it's not as valuable. Now, it's important to understand that the form that history has taken in this vision is that of an idol. Well, idol is what? It's a false god. History has moved from an articulation of to an obfuscation of. We have to see history behind the mask. It's not the face of God any longer. It's that which covers it. Now, it also has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and a very definite direction. It's a direction of descent. It's a direction of kingdom which rises and falls, and another kingdom which rises and falls, and another kingdom which rises and falls, and another still. But in the end, the kingdom which will not fall. And if we look broadly through the rest of the book of Daniel, aside from the other visions he has, and I promise you this is the simplest one, we'll see that Daniel also gives us another piece of very important information, is that the task of Am Yisrael now becomes navigating within a system of history which we cannot lead. And also, that primary tool of navigation will be seeing the hand of God in everything and calling out his name. The presence of prayer is very real in the book of Daniel. And the ability to see the hand of God in history will become a primary task of those who inherit his work. Now, the transition that Am Yisrael is going through can be characterized in a very simple sense. It's the transition where Malchut is handed over to the nations, and we will live within a world which is no longer of our making. It's a transition from the leadership of the prophets who are articulating the voice of God to the leadership of the wise who will teach us how to see the hand of God in everything. And it is a transition ultimately from the Reish of Remez, of the understanding of being the chosen people in its land, living the story of God without reference to what lies beyond our borders, to the period of Drash, to be the people of the book who seek knowledge wherever it may be found, who understand that truth can only be articulated in the fullness of expression which is found in all of creation. And in the coming week, we're going to address the role that Ezra and Nehemiah play in the building of the nation.